Hi, this is a presentation of CCNA1, Chapter 11, Part 1, about how to create and grow a network. If we look at the typical small network topology, we typically have a LAN of some size, and then we have a WAN connection where we connect to the rest of the world. And both when we design and when we want to scale our network, there are different factors to be considered when we want to buy new types of networking devices or intermediate devices. For instance, is it the cost? How much money are we willing to spend? How many ports do we need? What speed do we need? Do we need 10 megabit, 100 megabit, 1 gigabit, 10 gigabit? In how many of the ports? Our switches and other devices, do they need to be expandable somehow, or is it a fixed number of ports? Are they modular? Can we just interconnect them with special cables? And are we able to manage the devices, both the switches and the routers, for instance? We also need to consider the IP addressing. What kind of an IP address segment do we want to give our users? Typically, we give a private segment. Do we want to subnet? How do we want to hand out the IP addresses? Do we want static or dynamic IP addressings? Typically, we would like both. For our end users, we typically have dynamic IP addresses, and for the rest, we use some kind of static scheme of handing out IP addresses. So we need to consider that. We might also consider to have some kind of redundancy in our network, where we have different paths to the servers, for instance, which is a good idea. If one cable breaks down, well, then there are others that can take over. Then we need to look at the protocols and the type of services and the type of application that we want to communicate over the network, to get an overview of all the different types of traffic that we have on our network and how we want them to be prioritized, or if we don't want them to be prioritized. We need to look at the network-aware applications, or the application at the application layer services. These are all programs and services and applications that need a well-functioning network somehow. There is, of course, also the real-time application, which is very important that they have a stable network connection. That could be voice over IP, that could be real-time video protocols, for instance. Here, it's not the speed that's important, but it is important that we have a stable speed or a stable bandwidth. Otherwise, it will not work. Then we have the whole thing to when we want to scale our network, we document what we do have, both the physical and the logical topology. The logical topology is typically the IP addressing scheme. Also make a list, an inventory of how the devices are spread in our network, and also a little bit about, of course, the budgeting, and make a traffic analysis. Try to find out how does things work right now before we do something, so that we have something to go back to if things start to getting slower, for instance. It's always nice to have some kind of a baseline where we can go in and compare our network traffic with how it used to be, for instance. Otherwise, it's very easy for us to say that, okay, now it's getting worse. But if we don't have any to document that, it could be very difficult to really find out whether the network is slower now than what it used to be. So we need to have some kind of a snapshot, and we can do that in many different ways. There are programs that can do it for us, or we can just do it ourselves with very simple tools like the software processes in our computer, but also just normal ping or trace to find out how the network is at the moment. yeah, and that was it. That was the first part. And now I